friends, today I am here with Pharmacology of Antihypertensive Drugs Part 4. Till now, in Part 1st, 2nd and 3rd, we have first of all started antihypertensive drug with basic introduction part, treatment strategy and what is hypertension, etc. In second part, we have discussed basic terminology of blood pressure and related things. In third lecture, we have discussed about the mechanism of blood pressure regulation in our body. Now in fourth part, I am here for classification of antihypertensive drugs. To understand and memorize the classification of antihypertensive drugs, I am here with 5 alpha words like A, B, C, D and V. In last lecture, in part 3rd, we have discussed that there are several strategies for treatment of hypertension. Like we have discussed that there are several agents which can treat hypertension. Like in mechanism, we have discussed that one enzyme, that was ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. So if we inhibit the ACE enzyme, we can treat hypertension. So we have ACE inhibitors. In second strategy, we have discussed that angiotensin receptors, 81 receptors are present at vasculature or in blood vessels, through which aldosterone secretion will raise and it will increase the hypertension. So we have to reduce the hypertension, so we have to block the 81 receptors so that aldosterone activities will be reduced. In next category, we have adrenergic blockers. We have studied that there are several adrenergic neurotransmitters which can help in contraction of heart and blood vessels, so that contraction will help in elevation of blood pressure. So we have to reduce the blood pressure by blocking adrenergic blockers, so that the neurotransmitters released by CNS through adrenergic system will be blocked and it does not work. So adrenergic blockers have 3 types here. First one is alpha adrenergic blockers, second one is beta adrenergic blockers, and third one is beta plus alpha adrenergic blockers. We have studied that alpha adrenergic blockers are basically block the alpha receptors which are present on blood vessels, but beta blockers are basically blocks the beta receptors which are present on heart muscle cells, and also there are some beta plus alpha adrenergic blockers which preferentially blocks the beta blockers, but in some extent it also blocks the alpha blockers. So we have 3 types of adrenergic blockers. Next, we have studied that calcium can help in contraction of any muscles. It can also contract the heart muscles. So calcium channel blockers will prevent in contraction of heart muscles, and so that elevation of blood pressure will be reduced by applying calcium channel blocker. Next one is central sympatholytics. Some central sympatholytics agents are there which can generally lysis means this will break down the centrally acting some neurotransmitters that can reduce the elevation of blood pressure also. Next, diuretics can decrease the blood volume by increasing the urine outflow from the body. Excretion of urine outflow will increase, so that blood pressure will be reduced. Diuretics, there are several examples of diuretics. And last one is vasodilators. We know that dilation will decrease the blood pressure by dilating the blood vessels. The pressure will be reduced. Why? Because the peripheral resistance will be decreased and blood pressure will be decreased. So there are some examples of vasodilators. So that there are 9 categories of antihypertensive drugs are there, which can be memorized by A, B, C, D and B. A for ACE inhibitors, angiotensin receptors, AT1 receptor blockers and alpha adrenergic blockers. These are denoted by A. Next one, B for beta adrenergic blockers for B, and beta plus alpha adrenergic blockers are also for B. Next one, for C, calcium channel blocker and central sympatholytics. Next one is D for diuretics and V for vasodilators, so that you can easily memorize it. There are 9 categories of antihypertensive drugs for treating hypertension. Now we are here to exemplify each category, each 9 category. We have to memorize some examples of these drugs, till now discovered drugs, to be memorized here. First one is ACE inhibitors. We have here studied that ACE inhibitors are angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, so that angiotensin 1 will not be converted into angiotensin 2, and so that vasoconstriction will be reduced, and so that the elevation of blood pressure will be reduced. So examples are captopril, enalapril, perindopril, ramipril and fosinopril, etc. One thing here to show that PRIL last with these drugs, PRIL. So ACE inhibitors can be memorized with the drugs that can be end with PRIL are ACE inhibitors like captopril, enalapril, perindopril, ramipril, fosinopril, etc. Next category, second category is angiotensin 81 receptor blockers. These drugs last with sartan, SARTAN. For example, losartan, valsartan, telmisartan, etc. These drugs, angiotensin receptor, as we have already studied that angiotensin drug will act on AT1 receptors and it will block the AT1 receptors, so that the activity of aldosterone will be reduced and the blood pressure will be reduced. Third one is alpha blockers. There are 2 categories for alpha blockers. There are 2 categories. Basically, we can define here or classify on the basis of how can we memorize it. There are some drugs which can last with josin, 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 like prazosin, terazosin, doxazosin. These drugs last with josin, JOSIN, prazosin, terazosin and doxazosin. Some drugs benzamine. Next category is beta adrenergic blockers. These drugs basically blocks the beta receptors present on the heart. These drugs basically last with OLOL, like propranolol, metoprolol, atenolol, etc. These are the beta adrenergic blockers. These drugs basically apply in several diseases of cardiovascular system. Next category is beta plus alpha adrenergic blockers. There are basically two drugs in this class, labetalol and carvedilol. For memorize, these drugs ends with LOL, only LOL. In beta blockers ends with OLOL, but the beta plus alpha adrenergic blockers ends with LOL, like labetalol and carvedilol. Next one is central sympatholytic agents. Central sympatholytic agents are the drugs which can reduce the neurotransmitters releases from the CNS. For example, clonidine and methyl dopa. These are the drugs which can lyse the centrally acting neurotransmitters. Next one is calcium channel blockers. There are three categories of calcium channel blockers. These are, first one is phenylalkylamine. Example is verapamil. Verapamil is the example of phenylalkylamine. Second category is benzothiazepine. Benzothiazepine. Example is diltiazem. Diltiazem is the example of benzothiazepine category of calcium channel blocker. And C is dihydropyridine. Dihydropyridine examples are amlodipine, nifedipine and felodipine. Here we can also see that the dihydropyridine group of calcium channel blockers are also end with dipine group, DIPINE. So we can memorize it easily: amlodipine, nifedipine, felodipine, etc. Next, eighth category is diuretics. Diuretics are basically categorized in three categories. First one is high ceiling diuretics. Example is furosemide, and medium efficacy diuretics. For example, hydrochlorothiazine, chlorothalidine, etc. And some weak efficacy drugs are there. For example, potassium sparing diuretics like spironolactone and amiloride. These are the example of weak diuretics which can be used as an antihypertensive drug. Next, last category is vasodilators. As we have already studied that vasodilators can dilate the vessels. Vessels may be arteries or veins, so that they can reduce the peripheral resistance, and so that it will decrease the elevation of blood pressure. So there are two categories of vasodilators. First one is the drugs which can only dilate the arteries. These are called as arteriolar vasodilators. For example, hydralazine and minoxidil are also the example of arteriolar vasodilators. Next category is arteriolar plus venous. Arteriolar plus venous vasodilators. That means it can dilate the arteries and also veins. For example, sodium nitroprusside. Sodium nitroprusside will dilate both arteries and veins, so that the blood pressure will be reduced. So we have today studied different categories of antihypertensive drugs or the strategy for treatment of hypertension, and we have also studied the examples of these categories that have discovered till now. And in next part of the lecture we will study the pharmacology of each category of these antihypertensive drugs.